at MIT, and I'm also the director of the Women and Gender Studies program. This event is actually a music and theater arts sponsored event. They are the main sponsors of the event. It is also co-sponsored by the History Department as well as the Women and Gender Studies program. And I have the honor and privilege of introducing Melissa Bilal, because she's my very good friend, as many of you know. We also work together. It's both fun and also a little weird to introduce someone that's an intellectual partner, sister, wife sometimes, but it's just we have been together for a long time. But it's great that I can share with you her accomplishments now in this very short introduction. She is currently the Associate Director of the Armenian Music Program and lecturer in the Department of Ethnomusicology at UCLA. Her research focuses on the Armenian experience in relation to Turkey's memory politics and the gender history of late Ottoman and post-Ottoman Armenian cultural and intellectual life. Her publications include the CD, Voice Imprints, recordings of Russian Armenian prisoners of war in German camps, 1916 to 1918, and the co-authored books in Turkish. The last one is titled, which I think is the one that's most like the closest, the one that's most related to today's talk, titled My Heart is Like Those Ruined Houses, Gomidas Vartabed's Musical Legacy. And previously in 2016, together with her very good friend, Lerna, she published a book titled A Cry for Justice, the first 5 Ottoman Armenian feminists from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic, this 2006. In 2007, she was a visiting scholar here at MIT in the History Department. And together with me, we launched a project that year titled Feminism in Armenian, A History in Documents, which is a book project. The book will come out hopefully from Stanford. We know it will come out from Stanford University Press, hopefully in 2000, what did you write here? 25, if things go well, maybe even earlier. And it also has a digital humanities component. Dr. Bilal is also presently working on her monograph, tentatively titled Injuries of Reconciliation, Being Armenian in Turkey. And so we will now hear Melissa's talk, and then we will have a mini recital by the California-based music ensemble WEM. So this is a very special, unique type of event because we have both music and a lecture, as well as the composition of the audience is very interesting. We have some MIT faculty here from history, different departments, as well as many people from the larger Boston Armenian community. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Van.
What a warm homecoming, really. Thanks everyone for coming, and my former colleagues, Hiramu and Elizabeth from MIT History, and my good friends from the community. I'm really very emotional. That actually I'm here now as UCLA, my new family, the WEM Ensemble, Professor Moses Bogosian and the Armenian Music Program that Moses has been, with great sacrifices, I have to say, has been developing for 10 years, and now we're moving forward, and I'm kind of very proud that I came back home with a title, with a different title. So obviously I thank the organizers of the event, and so as Lena said, after my presentation, my lecture, we will have a performance, beautiful mini concert by the WEM Ensemble. And as I said, as the Armenian Music Program, we are on a concert lecture tour. We were in Detroit, and last night we had, some of you were there, we had a concert, WEM had a concert, at the Holy Trinity Church in Cambridge. So today's talk, in a way, is a nice first time ever experiment of bringing my two areas of research together. One, my work on the life and work of Gomidas Vartabed, who was a turn of the 20th century Armenian song collector, composer, choral conductor, music scholar, and priest, who was active in the Ottoman and Russian empires and in Europe. I co-edited the book, as Lerna said, about his scholarly contributions, Gomidas Vartabed as a scholar of musicology and musicology basically, and ethnomusicology if you like. And my other area of research is Koharik Gazarossian, the Istanbul-born, Paris-educated pianist, composer, and music educator who raised to international recognition through her very much praised recitals around the world. So, though never met in person, Gazarossian's and Gomidas Vartabed's lives were very much connected through shared lived experiences of the same urban space, so same physical space of Istanbul, Constantinople, and the same communal spaces of Constantinople Armenian community. Also through mutual friends and intellectual circles, which included the renowned feminist activist writers of their time, which we are writing our book on. And more importantly, their lives were intertwined also through their musical compositions, and you will have the great and one in a lifetime opportunity of hearing the WEM Ensemble playing Gomidas and Gazarossian works to you. So this talk is kind of really an experiment, a nice experiment for me, an opportunity to basically unearth these connections between Gomidas Vartabed, Koharik Gazarossian, and the intellectual feminist circles that they both knew, and to point to the meaning of these connections in terms of reimagining histories and grand narratives, and reimagining musical canons. So, this talk is very much nourished by the research I have been conducting with Lerna that we launched at MIT. So that's why I also wanted to design this lecture this way. And as Lerna said, that research is on the history of Armenian feminism. So this is the draft cover of our upcoming book. And the reason why I'm showing this is because of a lot of relevant things. We started writing this book here at MIT. But during my research, my part of the research I was doing for this book, and also when Lerna was doing her part, we both, and also combined with my years of researching Gomidas and 19th and early 20th century Istanbul Armenian musical life, we just realized that they're actually one big intellectual community. It's us, it's the historiography that made us imagine them separately, right? So I'm pretty sure those of you who know who Gomidas Vartabed is never thought of him as friends with feminists. Right, that's actually my point here. So, so we found out that most of these feminist writers and activist women that we include in our book, public intellectuals and artists in the community, they befriended Gomidas, they wrote extensively about his concerts, and that actually tells a lot about the women who were writers and activists, but they were very musical too. They wrote music critics, reviews of his concert, and they made sense. So it shouldn't be surprising, because when Gomidas arrived in Istanbul in 1910, these women and men were a circle of local Armenian intellectuals. So as I said, it is historiography that isolated their stories from each other. So today I am trying to, probably the first modest attempt, to reimagine that narrative and bringing them back. So very brief kind of intro to Gomidas' bio, and then I will start talking about Koharik Gazarossian. So this is, as you know, today's Turkey, Armenia, Middle East, and Gomidas was born in Kütahya, Gudina. This is the Armenian quarter of what was then, what is today Kütahya, what was then the Armenian quarter, which is not there anymore. So Gomidas was there, born there, and he, at a very young age, he was an orphan. He was taken to Etchmiadzin, which was in what was then Russian Empire, which is today in Armenia, to be educated in a seminary. So he became a young seminarian, and in this Kevorkian Cemara seminary, they were very lucky because this seminary was known to have a very strong musical education. And there he learned both Western classical tradition, the staff notation theory, and also what is known as Hampartum notation, the Armenian church notation system. And this is where he started transcribing his first Armenian liturgical repertoires and folk repertoires from his classmates, from the priests who were there, and he also started composing. So, what?
No, nothing.
So, nothing. Okay.
You're talking about
so he's in Etchmiadzin, and one of his professors in Etchmiadzin is Magari Egmalian. Some of you know who he is. So the year he graduates from Etchmiadzin, he goes to Tiflis, what is today Tbilisi in Georgia, to work with Magari Egmalian. But I'm not going to be talking about Magari Egmalian. I will be talking about this woman. Margaret, or no?
Yeah,
It's still cooking.
turn off and off.
Margaret Babayan.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Where,
goes like this one.
yeah, I don't know where the switch is.
Oh, is it here?
Switch here.
It must be there.
This is already better. No, this is better. This is good.
There must be
No,
a
no, no,
switch
yeah,
somewhere.
this is better. This is
Yes,
good.
but you could do the opposite.
No, this is good. This is great.
Okay.
This looks very good.
Okay, so this is the time in Tiflis where he meets Margaret Babayan. Margaret Babayan is later going to become a very, very important singer in Paris Opera. She will be this Paris-based, internationally known singer and teacher, and will become Gomidas' confidant and best friend in his later years. And actually, this is a 1929 recording of Babayan singing one of Gomidas' folk song arrangements of Berceuse, the lullaby. So this is when I started like kind of intertwining history. So keep Babayan in mind because she is gonna come back later. So with a scholarship, the Mantashian scholarship, Gomidas goes to Berlin to study, receive higher education in music. This is a photograph from his Berlin years. He was there between 1896, 1899, and this is a very special piece of archival document that I found in the archive. It's his composition notebook from 1897-98 Berlin. So I don't have time to get into the details, but those of you who, like Hiromo, know music history, this is like, we have documentation of what kind of classes he was taking. He was, what kind of experiments he was doing in Berlin. Basically, he was focused on musicology courses in Humboldt University, and he was also taking private lessons of piano, harmonium, and he was very much interested in setting liturgical music into writing multi-part arrangements of the Holy Mass. He was basically focused on vocal music and keyboard music. So he goes back to Echmiadzin, he becomes the music teacher of the seminary and the music director of the main cathedral, Armenian Holy Echmiadzin Cathedral. He is already kind of his creative talent already surpasses what he is given in that context, because in the seminary there are only young men. He's like ahead of his time. He wants to start co-ed choirs, so he moves back and forth between Yerevan and Echmiadzin to bring young women and men together and to basically teach them the arrangements of the folk songs he collected. So this is almost like a crash course, the Gomidas. So when he's in Echmiadzin and he's teaching, he very much travels to Europe. And it is in Europe that he publishes the arrangements he wrote for folk songs that he has been collecting. So these two are the examples of his work that came out during his lifetime, and also an example of a concert. So what he was doing is he was collecting folk songs, and then he was arranging them into art songs, and then he was printing them and also giving concerts, forming choirs wherever he went, like throughout Europe really, and teaching these choirs the choral arrangements, or he was working with singers and pianists to teach them this new music that he created, and he was staging concerts. Most of the time he was conducting the concerts when it was a choral concert, and then he was also giving a lecture like me. This was the way he was designing his concerts, was he would show up and give a lecture and basically explain what these songs are, the genre, where he collected, from whom he collected, and then his own arrangement kind of approaches how he arranged the piece into an art song, to like a concert piece, and then they would sing. In 1910, this is actually where everything gets a bit kind of more dynamic for me. So he comes to our birthplace, to Istanbul. Constantinople. So in 1910, he is in Istanbul, and this is another really fascinating piece of documentation of his time in Istanbul. So this is the envelope he used when he was in Istanbul. He was invited by the Patriarch and the Tıbrastas, the Cantors Board of Galatya Kırkoğlu Savorit Church, which was like next to our high school. So he was there, his office was there, you see like Turklu Savorit Çevresi Galatya, and he was mainly invited there he was commissioned to write the multi-part arrangement of Badarak. So this was why he was there. And in here you see like 3 languages, Ottoman Turkish, Armenian, and French, that he used this envelope. And in the middle, this is a stamp that he designed of his signature. So it was mainly used for copyright purposes. He stamped his works so that they are not copied illegally. Yeah, this is where we went to high school with Lena. This is where Gomidas's office was.
Wow.
And he was, so yeah, Gomidas in Istanbul in 1910. And because this is not a lecture on Gomidas, I don't have time to go into details, but like he comes to Istanbul, everybody is very excited, they already know about him, there were interviews with him prior to his arrival in Istanbul newspapers. He comes and all the young choristers or local cantors board, they're there, including the students of Getronagan, which is like next to the church, and Esayan, the young women. They get together and they say, Vartabed, priest, Gomidas, please form a choir here too, because we have been hearing that you have been touring Europe, forming choirs and teaching your music. So this is a 333 voices strong Kusan choir, high Kusan choir that he formed in Istanbul, and they gave a number of concerts for the next 4 years in Istanbul, in the most important stages of Istanbul. And of course, we have, this is this photograph. I gave a talk on Miran Tumacan, who is standing there, one of his students, a couple of days ago in Detroit. And someone called me after and said, like, my grandmother was in that picture. So now my ambition is to be able to identify every single. Some of them are victims of the genocide. We don't know how many of these people survived, but right now I only know like 4 people in the photograph. But like, yes, and all these young women. So this is the choir, and these are their concert programs, booklets. They were really more than a program. They were full booklets with information about, because all these songs were very new to that urbanite, bourgeois, Armenian kind of strata, because he was basically bringing, collecting folk songs from more like agrarian communities, like that romantic idea of like your music resides in the folk, in the peasant. So he was turning them into elite art music. So basically, you see that he's also like teaching the urbanite Constantinople Armenians what is there in the homeland. So this is 1914 concert in Petishan of Hay Kusan. Kusan means bard. Hay Kusan is Armenian bard. So the first concert happened in December 1910. And how do I, as a historian, how do I know the details of that concert? Because someone was in the audience and she wrote her impressions about that very, very first concert Gomidas gave in Istanbul, and that person was none other than Anais, who is one of the feminist activist writers. Yevgenia Avedisyan, Anais was her pen name, that Lerna wrote a chapter on for our book. So it's through Anais's memoirs and her writings in the local newspapers, we know the perception, the reception of Gomidas's concerts in Istanbul by the urban literati intellectuals of the time. So, intertwined. So another feminist activist writer, the great poet of Armenian, Western Armenian literature. We owe modern Armenian literary language to her and her husband's textbooks, grammar books. She excelled, perfected literary Armenian modern language through her poems, feminist short stories, and a novel. She was also founder of one of the biggest women's organizations, women's education organizations in the Ottoman Empire, who opened 50 girls' schools across the Ottoman Empire, which was completely wiped off during the genocide. So her name is Zabela Sadur Sibyl, and when we learn about Gomidas, Vartabed, and Sibyl, we think that they belong to 2 separate, like isolated worlds. But like here we have Sibyl doing research, and I'm writing a chapter about her feminist writings and activism, and I come across an article that she's explaining that she visited this house where Gomidas Vartabed was residing in Istanbul. So this house is in Pangaltı, Istanbul, which is today Elmada. Actually, Gomidas lived there for 4 years, and Sibyl Zabel Asadur visited that house. And actually, thanks to her, we know the interior, like how it looked, like what was there in the first floor, second floor, that he was actually roomies with painter Panos Terlemezyan, one of the biggest painters of Armenian history. So again, using a feminist writer to shed light on Armenian music history, intertwined again. And here is in 1931, Gomidas is longer gone from Istanbul, but the local Arabic, the Orient newspaper is featuring him, publishing a special issue honoring Gomidas Vartabed. And again, the first articles are by Sibyl, a memoir by Gomidas, about Gomidas, and Anais, the concert at Petition. So, and so in 1914, fast forward, Gomidas, the scholar, the founder of International Music Society in Berlin, goes to Paris to give a scholarly presentation on Armenian music and dance. And he reads, this is in Paris, it's his identity card, that the annual conference of International Music Society, he is delivering a lecture. But also, I mean, as a matter of fact, Gomidas's scholarly side is not very much emphasized in history, but he was actually became very easily, confidently said that he was one of the founders of the discipline of modern musicology, because every person who was sitting next to him in that panel, we learned in I'm intro to history of ethnomusicology, intro to history to musicology. I learned every single person's name, but Gomidas, and that's because of the genocide. It's very clear. So, but he remained the correspondent of the society even when he went back to the Caucasus. He published his scholarly articles next to the others in their scholarly journal. As a matter of fact, this article is downloadable from JSTOR today. So like he's one of the very well-known music scholars of the time. These are his students. They were part of the Kusan choir. He recruited them from the Kusan choir, and he wanted to train them and send them to Paris to receive higher education in music so that they can come back and become professors in the music conservatory he wanted to establish in Ottoman Constantinople. This was his biggest dream. He wanted to start this music school, and both Western classical music and Armenian music education would be available, accessible in this music school. And as I said, he was going to train his students. But of course, World War I and the genocide buried all these dreams. And right around this time, when Gomidas was trying to build the conservatory, very active in Constantinople, meeting all these famous writers and intellectuals, and training his students, Koharik Gazarossian was born. So, Koharik Gazarossian was born in 1907, 3 years before Gomidas arrived in Constantinople. Her performing career began at a very early age. She took music lessons from prominent local Armenian and European composers in Istanbul, and her elementary education coincided with World War I. It was the most difficult times for Armenians. The community she grew up in witnessed the arrest and murder of its intellectuals and leaders, including Gomidas Vartabed. The community received the news of mass deportations and killings of Armenians all over the empire. Lerner wrote a book about this. During these troubling times, Gazarossian family stayed in mainland Istanbul and in one of the islands, nearby islands, as many other Armenians went and hid there. The city of Koharik's early youth looked like a refugee station for Armenian genocide survivors from the provinces. Most of them would soon leave the country along with the remaining intellectuals when the victorious Turkish army entered the city soon after Koharik's graduation from Esayan Armenian School. Actually, Esayan Armenian School is also where High Gavashmark, on which Lerna wrote her book on, and Sibyl, that I just mentioned, were teaching. Koharik left for Paris in the summer of 1926, and soon began attending the French National Conservatory of Music, where she studied piano, harmony, and composition. In 1934, she gave her debut recital as a concert pianist in Paris, where she performed a repertoire including one of her own compositions. It is around this time that she worked with Paris-based Paris Armenian community's Sipan Gomidas choir as a pianist and accompanied this choir singing her own choral songs. Around the same time, Gomidas Vartabed he survived the genocide and now was in a mental clinic near Paris. So they are again in the same urban space, but Gomidas is in the mental clinic. He's not composing anymore, and she is a young pianist and composer. And it was actually 1 year after she gave her debut recital, Gomidas passed away. Koharik gave concerts at several venues, continued composing and teaching piano. Her name regularly appeared in French music journals, and in the second half of the 30s, she also visited Istanbul. And this clipping from Aravelk again in Istanbul reports that she's coming for 2 months to Istanbul and is expected to have a concert during her stay. So in 1939, Koharik moves back to Istanbul due to her mother's health. Throughout the 40s, she has concerts in the famous Istanbul stages as well as in her own studio. Between 1947 and 49, for about a year and a half, Koharik Gazarossian toured the US and performed in major venues, including the Carnegie Hall. And here I found some newspaper covers, New York Herald Tribune, New York Times, the Times, and sorry, this is Times Hall Recital Program. This is New York Herald Tribune, but also there's New York Times, yeah, here. And also, her recital at Brooklyn Museum was aired on radio. While in New York, she also worked with famous pianist Edward Weiss. Her recitals were reported in the New York Times, New York Herald Tribune, and other major US newspapers. And by way of these reports, also in Cumhuriyet in Turkey. So Turkish newspapers are covering, of course no mention of Armenian, but and Istanbul Light, young pianist, is very successful in America. So basically it makes to the news in Turkey, to Istanbul, her hometown, through the New York Times coverage. And this is actually the radio timetable, and you see that her recital in Brooklyn Museum was aired on radio, which is, I think, a great success for an Armenian woman of her time. Again, we see that our women, the 12 women that we're writing our book on, another woman, Zari Kalemkerian, a feminist activist, that Lerna is writing a chapter on, kind of like cross paths with Gazarossian. When I present these things, like maybe for you it's like, yeah, this is so neat, but for us it's like, what? Koharik Gazarossian and Zari Kalemkerian? And then yes, of course, because Kalemkerian moved to New York from Istanbul, and Koharik, being friends with the other feminists, knew that she moved here and she's coming to New York. Like I'm coming here and you're here, like small community. She writes a letter to Zaruhi and says, hey, I will be giving a concert, why don't you come? And she also talks about like our mutual friend, Haygan Schmark, we missed her. Like really you see like how close they were, close-knit community of intellectual women. So inspired by Johann Sebastian Bach's The Well-Tempered Clavier, Gazarossian studied the individual characteristics of major and minor tones and the way composers from the 18th to 20th centuries interpreted these tonalities. So she was very much praised for this
innovative idea of, as a pianist, she put together 24 different concert programs, each dedicated to works composed in one key, to show the variety of tonalities each tone contained in it, and how composers experimented with the possibilities this variety opened. Basically, she was giving a music history lesson each time she was performing. The first of these recitals, which of course was in C major, was presented in Calvary Baptist Church in 1949 during her US tour. So you have the program here. Gazarossian was praised by music critics for this innovative concert idea, her masterful interpretation of the piano works, her technique as a pianist, her dynamism, maturity, and upon her return from the US, she began touring several European capitals. So you see here in 1950, right? Like she returns back from the US in 1949, and then in 1950 she's in Sarajevo performing again. And then she performs in Lebanon, Cairo, again in Istanbul. She performs in the Wigmore Hall of London. She appears on radio, television. I wish we had, the recordings of those probably somewhere in the TV archives. Across Europe, playing with major orchestras of Europe under the batons of many renowned conductors. And she's like rising to international success and recognition. And someone comes back to our stage to report this successful woman from Constantinople to basically inform her community about her success. And that person is Margarit Babayan. So she comes back to the picture. You will remember her. She is Gomidas' best friend. Herself is a very renowned opera singer and educator and music critic. She follows her throughout her European tour, and she reports back. She writes reviews of her success and performances in Europe to a local Istanbul Armenian theater and performing arts journal, Kulis. And as a matter of fact, I don't have here, but Koharik Gazarossian dedicated some of her compositions to Margarit Babayan. So like these dedications also are very important in tracing the footsteps of women in music history, because they dedicate compositions, their original music work, to each other. So that we know that they were close friends. She was also, Margarit was covering her, and she was dedicating works to Margarit Babayan. So a mutual friend with Gomidas. So Babayan repeatedly noted the importance of informing Armenians about the achievements of this internationally acclaimed member of their own community. One thing you might wonder, like I don't have all of the concert programs of Koharik's recitals, but in what I have, and I don't see any women composers in her music history in one-tone concert programs. I wonder if she ever performed any women composers other than herself, or any composer other than Gomidas Vartabed, who has not been canonized in Western classical music repertoire. But an entry about her in the 1958 edition of Musique Larousse was perhaps a first solid step towards writing her into the canon. The fact that she was included in this international encyclopedia made it to the news in Istanbul Armenian press as well. In the 1950s and 60s, Koharik performed in Istanbul's biggest concert halls, most important stages, and she worked at the same time as the chair of Esayan Alumni's, her school's alumni club's music committee. She invited many Armenian musicians from different parts of the world, organized concerts for them, and regularly wrote about them in the then mentioned Kulis journal. Among them was Armen Girak from Argentina, and she's on the piano and he's singing. So among them were singers Armen Girak Sakızlian from Argentina, Gohar Kasparyan from Armenia, Soviet Armenia, and violinist Giray Kantarjian from Beirut. Koharik was the liaison between her native community of Istanbul Armenians and the Armenian musicians dispersed around the world. She had the dream of forming an organization of Armenian musicians in the diaspora. And not only Armenian musicians around the world, she brought them to Istanbul. This is also a very important historic fact. When in 1965, Azeri composer and conductor Niyazi Tagizadeh Hajibeyov was invited to conduct the Istanbul Opera Orchestra, Gazarossian hosted him and a circle of musicians, artists, writers, and journals in her apartment. She penned a piece for the same Kulis journal on Niyazi Tagizadeh, who was well versed in the repertoire created by Armenian composers himself. The Azeri composer and conductor was very well versed in Armenian composers' work because he conducted these works. And also because he studied composition with the same mentor as Armenian composer Aram Khachadurian. So I wonder what they are talking about, but they look very informed by each other. So you see, she is this hub of Armenian artists and musicians in Istanbul, brings the whole world to Istanbul. So, yeah. In 1950, publication of Gazarossian's works, in 1940, a collection of her compositions had been printed in Paris. And in 1967, her 24 etudes. And actually very recently, the etudes have been recorded. There's a lot of like Gazarossian music revival going on. Her other published works appeared in Lebanon in 1948 and 57 in the Husk Yearbook of Armenian Studies. They were the polyphonic settings of church melodies. She was basically following Gomidas' footsteps, but obviously these are not canonized. We go to the church, we don't hear Koharik Gazarossian's polyphonic arrangements of church melodies, but yeah, she wrote them. Most of Gazarossian's works are for piano, but many others are for different combinations of instruments such as violin, viola, cello, flute, oboe, and the organ. She has numerous solo and choral works, a ballet suite. I won't talk about her musical language, but I want to note that critiques compared her melodies to those of Gabrielle Fauré and her repertoire to that of Bela Bartok's. Makes sense. She herself wrote about her own stylistic choices in a letter to, what do I have here? Oh, I don't have that letter. Which Lerna generously scanned for me from Armenian Cultural Foundation here, because these letters are preserved in Armenian Cultural Foundation here. They are by her student Ardashes Shilumyan. And in these letters, she noted that although the 12-tone technique is very much in fashion, she still prefers to compose tonal music. So most of Koharik's works remained unpublished until historian and music scholar Haik Avakian of Cairo visited Gazarossian's niece, Sona Bedrosian, in Paris in 2001 and got copies of the composer's manuscripts, and he edited, annotated, published them in separate volumes with introductions, very important detailed work with information and everything, and I heavily rely on Haik Avakian's edited volumes for actually like the piece that the VEM Ensemble will perform today is coming from Haik Avakian's editions. In 1967, Gazarossian was in Egypt. Her appearance in Cairo and Alexandria stages were covered in local Armenian and French newspapers with great admiration. The same year, she played her 24 etudes to renowned composer Aram Khachadurian. Gazarossian passed away in Paris, where she had gone for treatment a few months after her tour to Egypt. Many friends wrote eulogies for this woman who challenged artificial divides and boundaries with her intellect and wisdom and talent. One of them was her close friend Adrine Dadurian, another feminist writer who was a student of Sibyl I just mentioned. And in the middle, you see Hayganush Mark. When Lena and I were working in Hayganush Mark's archive in Yerevan, we came across letters by Koharik. And on this slide, you see one of the letters that she wrote in 1956 on the back of a photograph of her by the piano. Koharik tells Hayganush that she will soon inform her about an event organized to her honor. And we know that that event was this, and this is Koharik Gazarossian, and this is Hayganush Mark, and this was the 50th year jubilee of Hayganush Mark, and Koharik was in the organization committee. And then another letter by Koharik to Hayganush that we found in the archive. And another photograph that shows Mark and Gazarossian posed to the camera on July 6, 1957. After a concert by Gazarossian in her apartment in Shishli, and the repertoire she presented that day included songs she wrote on Hayganush Mark's poetry. So, as a part of our ongoing project, Lerna and I, with the gracious, generous funds provided by MIT Center for Arts Center, Science and Technology, the CASP Mellon grant that we received, we are putting together an online exhibition where Koharik's and Hayganush's friendship will be featured. So we could not include Koharik, although she is not one of the Armenian feminist writers in our book, we could not include her in our exhibition because she's omnipresent in the lives of these feminist women. She was expressing herself with the musical language. So these are her composition notebooks that she wrote songs on. She set Hayganush Mark's poems into music, to art songs. And a few years ago, in collaboration with UCLA Armenian Music Program, we revived 4 songs that testify Koharik's and Hayganush's friendship. So we basically copied these, scanned these music from the archive and revived them, I guess for the first time after that concert that I showed. Finally, so yeah, another composition by Gazarossian on Hayganush Mark's poem. Well, Gomidas Vartabed had a special place in Koharik's life. Koharik organized an evening in his honor and memory when she was the chair of the music committee in Esayan Alumni Association. And this precious photo is from the police archive, and you see them together. Gazarossian visited Gomidas's birthplace in Kütahya, Gudina, and it was one of the most impactful experiences of her life. There she saw his birth home, visited his relatives who were still there surviving after the genocide, and the relatives told her that during the genocide they had to burn everything they had owned related to Gomidas because they were scared. Except for one issue of one journal that had his photo on it. And Gazarossian took that issue and the photo. And she wrote for Istanbul Zamanak Daily, first to Haraj and then Istanbul Zamanak Daily, of her pilgrimage to Kütahya, to Gomidas's birth home. In 1943, researcher and writer Toros Azadyan, who had some of Gomidas Vartabed's belongings from his time in Istanbul, trusted Koharik Gazarossian Gomidas's handwritten notebooks. These were field notes, field transcriptions of 70 songs Gomidas collected when Gomidas was in Istanbul between 1910 and 1919, with an interruption by the genocide. In 1913, he went to the Surmalu region, which is today's Iğdır. It was the Yerevan province of Russian Empire, and he went to a folk song excursion. So these two notebooks, today kept in the archive in Yerevan, were in Istanbul. Because he was arrested and his house was looted, so somehow Azadyan was able to collect his belongings, and in 1943, he gives these two notebooks, precious notebooks, to Koharik Gazarossian. Between 42 and 47, for 5 years, Gazarossian studies these manuscripts. They are in Hampartu notation, in old Armenian, not old, Armenian church notation, that she doesn't know, she didn't study it in the conservatory. She learns how to decipher this notation system. She studies the melody, and then she arranged them, 20 of them, for voice and piano, and publishes in Lebanon in 1950. So when I worked on the Gomidas documents under Toros Azadyan Fund in Yerevan, I was able to match the songs in Gazarossian's publication, Gazarossian's arrangements, with those in Gomidas's handwritten song collection notebooks from the summer of 1913. So the first piece you will be hearing today from VEM Ensemble is a string quartet piece by Gazarossian that takes its main theme from one of these songs from that very folk song transcription notebook. It's called Akçi Merit Merela, and after that they will be playing 4 Gomidas miniatures, and in the middle you will hear this wonderful 8th century melody by Khosrovi Kokhnatsi, arranged by our dear friend Artur Avanesov, the accomplished composer from Armenia. And I thought it would be nice also to include Khosrovi because we're talking about, because it's a sharagan, I think it connects very well Gomidas's and Koharik's stories. So I invite our very own VEM Ensemble, Ella, Damon, and Niall, and Professor Marcel Balasyan.
Mark, can you turn on the light again? Look. Yeah. Melissa, also the other light, the one on the stage, wherever Hiromu did it. Hiromu, where's the other light switch? Yeah, sorry. On the right. I think it's on the üst taraf, aşağıda mı?
Is that light enough?
Enough light?
Oh, well, we're playing from iPads, so it's okay, but if you can see us.
Both of them. Let's turn both of them on. Right. Yeah.
Let there be light.
Let there be light.
We're going to tune.
Yeah.
Briefly.
Okay.
be here. Thank you for a wonderful lecture, Melissa. A slightly amended plan of our mini concert is 3 Gomidas miniatures, but one piece that was heard so far only twice. So it's a world premiere for MIT for sure, and we'll tell you about it, but later. But this is Koharik Gazarossian, followed by Gomidas' Alaylules and Kele Kele. The interesting edit, somewhat fascinating aspect to this, even with the mini concert, I was thinking, is these are melodies collected or found or preserved, and they're all in fact arranged by different musicians. And so these two are arranged by Soviet performer, cellist. And so you can hear that. These are Komitas original melodies, but westernized harmonies, romanticized. The first one is written by sophisticated, Paris-educated woman, so there is an imprint of personality harmonically. There's certain complexity, certain oddities almost, one would say, but on purpose, clearly. So more original. Now you're going to hear similarly original arrangement. One doesn't want to even call it arrangement. It's individually, it's a work in its own right of a melody, simple single melody by Khosrow from 8th century that our brilliant friend Artur Avanesov made into his own piece, and which was premiered just a few weeks ago in Armenia. Now it's receiving its MIT premiere.
imagined this, but right now we are doing what Gazarossian was doing. Armenian music history, all the like music of connections from the first woman composer, poet, first known recorded woman, Armenian woman composer, hymnographer, Sharagan writer, Postrovitov, to 21st century Arthur Avanesov in Armenia, one of the first woman composers of Turkey that is completely kind of out of the canon and silenced in Turkey, Koharik Gazarossian to Gomidas. Really, this is music of connections, and when I said why not Postrovitov, I wouldn't imagine
Yes.
the connection because
It's wonderful,
yeah.
truly intertwined.
Yeah, really intertwined.
Yeah.
And the next piece is even more intertwined.
Well, I was just thinking, so far we had two arrangements by two pianists, Gazarossian and Avanesov, and one cellist, Aslamazyan. Something's wrong about that picture. We need to have a parity. So we're going to add one more arrangement by another cellist. And that cellist is right here. So you're going to hear a piece that was created because of a special circumstance for our concert in Detroit that was dedicated to memory of Tigran Tumajan, a dear friend of many of us and one of pillars of Detroit community who passed last year. His great uncle was Mihran Tumajan, one of the Komitas' 5 pupils. So Melissa identified the song by Mihran Tumajan, Orim Orim, which is lullaby from Butanya. I identified the arranger. I called him up. This is less than a week before our trip to Detroit. And Niall created Orim Orim for string quartet, and we premiered it in Detroit on Tuesday. We also played it at Tekian Cultural Center on Wednesday night. This is a third performance of Orim Orim by Tumajan, Niall, Taro, Ferguson.
Thank you.
inspiration twice, and I will use it again because I like it. I'm recycling realization that we probably in the Guinness record books by performing a concert that has piece written in the 8th century and a piece written last week by the scope. So this is the final piece. Of course, it's Koharik.
performance. Thank you, Melissa. And I need to add that we had 2 more sponsors for the event. I apologize that I forgot. I only mentioned the MIT names because I'm just so used to having only MIT people sponsor us. But also, obviously, Tekayan Cultural Association, 2 Armenian organizations based in the Boston area are also sponsors of this event. One of them is Tekayan, the other one is National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NASR. And their representatives are both here, Mark Mamigonian and Aram Arkun. We would like to thank both of you. Aram, I think, thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
If you have any questions for Melissa, we didn't do the customary Q&A session, but we'll be here for a while. She can answer the questions.
Thank you so much.